We continue looking at the Constitutional Court ruling just yesterday that will allow independent candidates to run for elections. We take a closer look at the impact of this on smaller parties in Parliament, and for that I'm joined now by the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Pieter Groenewald. A very good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Groenewald. Let's just look at how your party performed in the last elections. I mean, ultimately, with this court ruling now in place, do you think that it's the maturity of democracy or a matter that would actually complicate a system that seems to have been working to date?
Good afternoon. Well, firstly, I want to say that we have no objection if independent candidates want to participate in the election. But what we say is that if we talk about democracy, then we must be very careful when we want to amend as far as the Constitutional Court is concerned, the electoral system of South Africa. Unfortunately, if you take an electoral system, for instance, where there is a constituency-based election, a pure constituency electoral system, then the problem is that the borders can easily be manipulated, and then you can get a situation where a governing party can stay in government, but even with less voters who voted for them. And in the history of South Africa, we have three incidents. The most known one is in 1948. Then a new nationalist party won the election. They became the government, but they had about 100,000 votes less than the opposition party. So that is the problem with a pure constituency electoral system. The Freedom Front Plus say if you want to accommodate independent candidates, you have to change then in one way the electoral system, and then we must be very cautious how we amend and change the electoral system, because a governing party can easily misuse their majority to manipulate it in such a way that it will benefit the governing party to get more seats in Parliament with less votes.
All right, Dr. Groenewald, I mean, there's about 3 years for the electoral system, perhaps, that the electoral system has to put that in place. But I want to look at the current electoral system and how it's been recognizing political party contestations. Do you think political parties have been really representing the interests of ordinary South Africans?
Well, in the democracy, that is why there are political parties. People that think that an independent candidate will now serve the people and the interests of the electorate more than political parties is open for debate. People think that if it's an independent candidate and an independent member of Parliament, that he or she will be more, or will act more in the interest of the electorate. And I'm not so sure about that, because there are benefits. The first thing is that the voters know who the member of Parliament is, but you can take the system on local government level in South Africa at present. If you go and ask people, do you know who your ward councillor is? Because a ward is even much smaller than a constituent of a constituency. So I will be surprised if more than 20% people will know who the ward councillor is. The problem is that people think that if a member of Parliament does not perform, say after 2 years after the election, they can replace the person. That's not true. A person is elected for 5 years, and you have an opportunity to get rid of a specific candidate only after 5 years. The one thing is that if a member is a member of a political party, if he or she does not perform, the political party can expel that person and replace it with someone else in the present electoral system. But if it is an independent candidate, no one has authority over that person. And I mean, political parties, that's part of a political party, to ensure that they serve the people. And if they do not serve, they know that the voters will not vote for them at the next election. So I think people must just be a bit more realistic And I say again, I have no problem with independent candidates. And yes, people do know who the candidate is normally. If it is an independent candidate and there's a certain constituencies-based electoral system. But again, I say...
Dr. Groenewald, I just want to also then touch on perhaps how this judgment is ultimately going to impact the state of smaller parties. I mean, it could either make or break them. What is your take on this?
Well, firstly, we must remember that the Constitution determines that in general the result must be proportional in South Africa. If we want to change, we will have to go to the same system as on local government level. And in the end, it still represents the proportionality of all the votes in South Africa. So if they stick to that, it will not have any effect on smaller parties. If they get a certain number of votes, they will still have representation. But I say again, that is if the electoral system is the same as on a local government level, where it provides for independent candidates to participate.
Dr. Groenewald, looking at the duration that the various arms of the state have to implement or even amend as per the ConCourt and what it's found, I mean, what do you think has been the reasoning behind this? Could you contextualize it for us? I mean, we do understand elections are coming up in 2024, but what are the other factors should be considered?
Well, what I think the Constitutional Court heavily laid on is the fact that the Constitution says that any person, any South African citizen, can be elected to any legislature. And that was the essence of this case. Whereas at the present electoral system, individuals cannot participate. It's only political parties. So what the Constitutional Court now says is actually that any person, and it is actually giving effect on that specific article in the Constitution of South Africa. But if I look at the end in practice, I want to say that even independent candidates will not easily be elected. And I mean, the history is there. If you go to the, for instance, local government level, there are very, very few independent candidates who get elected. And even on provincial and national level, it's even more difficult because, I mean, you have to run a campaign. If you think you can just put up your name and everybody will vote for you, that is not as simple as that. You will have to run a campaign. It's costing quite a lot of money to put on posters and everything. You will need an infrastructure, people who assist you. And I think in the end, it will actually only people who's got a lot of money who will be able to be an independent candidate. And it will not be that easy to just be elected to say, I'm an independent, put your name on a ballot and think that you are going to make it into Parliament.
Looking at Parliament, and at some point they were found to have failed to hold former President Jacob Zuma accountable. Do you believe that Parliament has any role to do to bring into effect the court findings such as this one based on previous acts?
Let's repeat that again.
So we're looking at Parliament, and perhaps we're at some point, I mean, they were found to have failed to hold former President Jacob Zuma, accountable. I want to know from you in that regard, do you believe that Parliament has any role to then bring into effect the court findings such as this one from ConCourt?
Well, if you talk about the fact that they did not hold Zuma accountable, it's a debatable issue. I know there were different motions, and there were even a secret vote on the motion of no confidence against Jacob Zuma. All over the world, that's the way democracy works. The majority in the House, and it depends on the governing party. The fact and the question should be, would any independent candidate made a difference as far as that is concerned? The problem is that Parliament has to study this ConCourt finding very clearly. And when it comes to accountability, then I say that Parliament should do more about that. But unfortunately, in the end, Parliament consists of members of Parliament and political parties. Let's take, for instance, at present, the governing party has a majority in each and every portfolio committee in Parliament. And sometimes there are political decisions that is taken, and that is not always to the benefit of the people of South Africa, although the argument is. But you're the majority party. The majority of the people voted for this party. So it is in the interest of the majority. And they have an opportunity, if they're not happy with that, to change the government at the next election. So that is the argument normally used by governing parties. But what you need in Parliament is actually that the criteria for members to become a member of Parliament, and that depends on the political parties itself, to ensure...
All right, Dr. Pieter Groenewald, I'm going to have to leave it there. Leader of the Freedom Front Plus, just taking the Constitutional Court judgment forward and probing the attitude of smaller parties in relation to this. Again, thank you very much for your time.